How to engage, connect, and captivate. Become the social presence you've always wanted to be. Small talk, meaningful communication, and deep connections. Written by Patrick King, narrated by Russell Newton. Are you one of those people who hates small talk? When you think about it, what you might really hate is being bad at small talk. Learning how to chit-chat casually with people you're not very familiar with can seem difficult or boring if you don't know what you're doing. Yes, many people out there seem to be blessed with the social butterfly gene that allows them to easily slip into charming conversation with just about anyone. But if you're not one of those people, don't worry. You can learn. Becoming good at conversation is not something we usually think of as a skill to practice and master. But fortunately, just a little effort can make you far more confident, more approachable, and a much better listener. In this book, we'll be looking at how to prepare to be a good conversationalist even before you open your mouth, how to get in the right frame of mind, how to engage meaningfully with others, as well as all the unspoken rules that make the difference between a dead-end conversation and you charming the socks off a person you met just 2 minutes ago. Before we dive in, however, let's take a closer look at what not to do. You don't want a conversation to fizzle into awkward silence, but you also don't want to try so hard that you make other people uncomfortable. Improving your conversation skills is not about being phony, manipulative, or desperate. It's the opposite, in fact. What to avoid. 1. Playing at being the cool guy. We all know what it looks like to be good with people, to be confident, relaxed, charming, and witty, to tell good stories and give compliments that have people eating out of the palm of your hand. In other words, to be that cool guy. But can you picture it right now? You're at a social gathering, and there's that one awkward guy, clearly nervous, maybe overdressed, who might as well be wearing a sign over his head saying, "I read a book about how to look cool and confident." You know how it goes. You try to talk to such a person, and you get the distinct impression that what they say has been rehearsed in a mirror beforehand. He's talking too loud. He seems uncomfortable and pushy. It's simple. It's all fake. A lot of us, particularly if we're quiet or introverted people, mistakenly believe that being more sociable and engaging in conversation means changing who we are as people. We may have an image of who that popular cool person is and think that if we want to succeed socially, we need to mimic that. But mimicry is actually the worst thing you can do, because trying to be someone who you're not will never, ever work. The best you can do is be a subpar copy of someone else. This would be okay, except for the fact that people are a lot smarter than they may seem, and can almost always tell that you're not being authentic. So instead of connecting genuinely to people and closing that gap between you, you only put up further barriers and possibly create more tension. Calling this mistake the cool guy doesn't mean it only applies to men, or to people who want to come across as ultra-confident. It refers to any person who is actively and transparently seeking to portray themselves in a particular way. In other words, it's trying to be someone else. Your version of the cool guy might be to pretend you like what the group likes, or dress in a way that is uncomfortable, but you feel helps you fit in. Maybe you try too hard to appear friendly and easygoing, so that your smile eventually becomes forced, and people notice the opposite of what you intend, that you actually seem stressed out. One way that socializing can become inauthentic is through alcohol. Many people genuinely think that they need to drink, since they see their sober selves as inadequate, and being a little drunk makes it easier to play some other role, to be someone else. Another example is rehearsed jokes or pickup lines, all likely to be experienced as insincere and outright fake. What people will see is not the mask, but the effort you've made to put on that mask. Of course, being inauthentic doesn't have to be anything dramatic. If you simply hold the mindset that you don't quite like yourself and wish you were someone different, you can't help but unconsciously communicate that to others. Someone who engages with others while holding the belief of, I need to be XYZ, will behave very differently from someone who is merely attempting to connect with others, to learn about them, and to share who they are. It may seem strange to start a book like this with a word on authenticity. Isn't it a contradiction to read a book about how to be different that tells you not to try too hard to be something you're not? But this is a subtle and important point. We do not have to change who we are to be better communicators and more skillful at conversation. But we can become better at expressing what we are to others. The goal is not to build up a false front, an alter ego that's good at small talk. Rather, the goal is to become better at letting people see who you are as you are, and doing the same for them. If you can connect authentically to others in this way, you'll be perceived as charismatic, interesting, and likable. But if you're noticeably trying to be all these things, people can't help but perceive the trying. How can you avoid the trap of trying to be your own version of the cool guy? Firstly, keep reminding yourself that being a great conversationalist is not about rehearsing, saying this or that, or acting. It's not about being a perfect and invulnerable person. Think about who you are and what distinguishes you from everyone else. The people that love you, what do they see in you? That essence that makes you who you are, there's no need to hide it. Consider an example. In a conversation, someone is clearly nervous and uncomfortable, but they're trying vehemently to hide the fact. They talk loudly and force a laugh, even acting a little cocky. What's your response to them? Now, think about someone else who's clearly nervous and uncomfortable. But imagine that this person smiles simply at you, shrugs, and says, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm pretty nervous right now. How's your reaction to them different? Being introverted, softly spoken, or quiet doesn't mean that you cannot connect with others. Turn up meaningfully in conversations, as you are and with genuineness, and you engage with others far quicker than if you were merely pretending otherwise. In the rest of this book, if you read a suggestion or technique and it really doesn't feel right to you, then simply don't use it. Authenticity is more important. As you talk to people, try to recall a compliment you've received in the past that made you feel like $1 million. Smile and relax in the knowledge that you, just as you are awesome. Don't rush when you talk. You don't have to quickly share everything interesting about yourself in one go. Just be curious about where the conversational flow is going. Don't be afraid to say something a little unexpected. When you follow a safe formula, you're boring. Why not highlight the most unusual parts of your personality instead? Similarly, don't be afraid to admit you don't know something, have made a mistake, or don't understand. A confident confession is more endearing than someone fumbling to pretend they're on top of things when they aren't. What to avoid too? Being a boring know-it-all. The previous mistake is all about assuming that we have to be someone else, to be cool and confident if we want to be good conversationalists. This mistake is similar in that we imagine that we have to be super smart, logical, and right in order for others to like us and want to talk to us. Picture two acquaintances chatting, and one person says, I love George Eliot. He was one of my favorite authors growing up. The other person's ears prick, and they jump in and immediately say, George Eliot? You know that's a woman, right? George Eliot's just her pen name. The first person then says, Oh, really? So Vanity Fair was written by a woman? The rest of the conversation veers off as the other person smugly informs them that, no, Vanity Fair was, in actual fact, written by William Makepeace Thackeray and was obviously a man. In no time, the conversation becomes the one person haughtily giving the other a lesson on Victorian literature, as the eyes of the first quietly glaze over in boredom. What's gone wrong here? Let's be honest. It's human nature to want to be right. Most of us like to feel that we're smart or in the know, and can't help but leap in to fix a correction or share our knowledge and skill with others. But the problem is obvious. People don't have conversations with each other merely to gather new data. If you get carried away being super logical and pedantic, you miss the real point of human conversation, which is to connect emotionally. What's important is to sustain a pleasant, lively flow of banter that brings both people closer together. If you keep getting distracted by the veracity of little details, or worse, keeping of who is right and who is wrong, then you're killing that conversational flow dead in its tracks. If we're honest, most of us engage in this pedantic behavior not because we're sticklers for accuracy or champions for the truth, but merely because we want to show off. Picture someone who won't let something go, even when the conversation has moved on, or imagine someone who makes a point of letting everyone else know how wrong they are while they proceed to correct and enlighten them. Not much fun, right? Being overly logical means you're inflexible, rigid, and lacking in the ability to think outside the box or have little humor. In other words, you're boring company. But let's dig deeper. Why do people fall into this trap? For some people, being the clever know-it-all is one form of inauthenticity, as discussed in the previous section. Being a smarty-pants can feel like a useful shield, or an intimidating mask or persona to hide behind in the hopes that other people would be impressed or convinced that we're likable or valuable. For some people, emphasizing their own intellect speaks to an insecurity in this area, and conversations for them become something like battlegrounds rather than opportunities to connect and have fun with others. Think about how the conversational tone might have been different if the person in the example simply said, "I think George Eliot is actually a woman. If I was giving myself a male pseudonym, I'd go with something more exciting than George, though, wouldn't you?" Or imagine if the person had simply let the mistake slide. Does it really matter, ultimately, if someone is mistaken? This is something important to understand when we think about connecting with others. The content of a conversation is not all that important, but the way that content is conveyed makes all the difference. To put it differently, a conversation is primarily a flow of energy and feeling rather than an exchange of information. If you can connect to someone on a personal, emotional level, it's entirely irrelevant what specific details you talk about to get there. So if someone says, "I wonder if ancient Aramaic had swear words," you could cut the conversation short to Google it on your phone, or follow it up with a response that keeps the conversation flowing instead. Can you imagine Jesus swearing at his carpentry would make a pretty funny sketch. If someone pronounces something wrong, simply pronounce it accurately yourself, and avoid pompously saying, "Well, actually." It's all about shifting your perspective and understanding what your real goal is in having a conversation in the first place. You don't have to prove yourself to anyone, impress them, or demonstrate your intelligence. You certainly don't have to put anyone else down. Rather, a conversation is about people and the connection they make, not the facts they share. Consider the statement, "Oh, I would so love to run away and live in Chile for a year. People there live in such poverty, and I'd love to make a difference in a small way." You could respond to the purely factual data in the statement and pipe in by saying that Chile actually has lower poverty rates than the U.S. Or you could respond to the emotional content of what's been shared with you and notice how excited the person is by the prospect of doing good in the world. The first response will be technically correct, but it's the second that will keep the dialogue going and foster a meaningful connection with the other person. If you ever are tempted to be a know-it-all in conversations, try to put yourself in the other person's shoes. Do you like people more just because they always have the right answer? Do you feel strongly connected to people just after they butt into the conversation to tell you you're wrong? Chances are, what you are drawn to is someone who is listening, empathetic, easygoing, kind, and receptive. Who is right is almost irrelevant. Often, we're quick to assume that people are wrong when what's really happened is that we just don't quite understand their viewpoint. Instead of writing off their opinion, ask them more about it. You might be surprised at what you learn. Treat other people as the experts. Ask them to talk about something they understand deeply, then listen. Have an attitude of wonder and curiosity and keep things open-ended. Your goal is not to resolve a question, but to keep up the flow of an enjoyable discussion about what it could be. Use humor. Be playful and creative. Knowing something is boring. Isn't it more fun to imagine possibilities or think about what you don't yet understand? What to avoid 3? Bringing your ego to the party. Closely connected to the above is the person that's not only always right about facts and data, but also seems to insist that their tastes and opinions are the right ones too. This is the person who will gleefully play thought police in a group of people, act like a snob, or quietly, or not so quietly, judge others for their beliefs and actions. This is the stubborn person who tells it like it is, and flat out refuses to entertain anybody's perspective but their own, i.e., the best one. There isn't enough space in this small book to cover all the vast and colorful ways that the ego can make its presence known, but suffice to say that this conversational mistake is one where we forget that it takes two to tango. Again, it comes down to fundamental beliefs about what conversations are actually for. If you're desperately playing the cool guy, you might think, conversations are ways to convince people to like me and accept me. If you're a know-it-all, you may think conversations are ways to prove your superior intellect and show off. For some people, though, conversations can be like wrestling matches where you have to beat down your opponents. They imagine themselves on soapboxes, preaching their own opinion and trying to make everyone else see that it's the right one. When the ego's in charge, conversations are a platform not for connection but for combat. Alternatively, a dialogue isn't even felt to be a dialogue at all, but rather a captive audience who are compelled to watch your performance as you entertain or inform or chastise. The flow doesn't go both ways. The audience is at most expected to applaud at the right moments. Though we've all known people who dramatically dominate conversations this way, the truth is that any one of us can become self-centered in conversation, even if we see ourselves as shy and retiring. For example, you may nervously chatter on about something without pausing, and since you're constantly planning what you'll say next, you never really hear what the other person is saying. In other words, having low confidence and fretting about how we appear can often be the thing that makes us most selfish in conversation. When you bring your ego to the party, your goal again shifts away from connecting with others and onto supporting and bolstering your own ego. This hinders your ability to listen to and empathize with other people because, well, you're the most important person in the conversation, and it definitely prevents you from learning anything new. What's there to learn when you know everything already? Conversations are not contests where there can be only one victor, the one who can argue their case best. Though it's always important to be honest and true to yourself, the reality is that it's seldom appropriate or worthwhile getting into heated debates where you try to one-up the other person. Not only will you not change their mind, but you'll also lose any possible connection. Good conversations flow. They're dynamic and flexible, with energy moving freely between both people. If you hog all the time to make a speech about something, you stop the flow. If you keep insisting on your opinion, you similarly strangle that back and forth. Either people will push back and you'll have an argument, or they'll detach and likely avoid you in the future. Talking to abrasive, all-or-nothing types can be draining Instead, remind yourself that any two people can have a good conversation, and they don't need to agree to do so. The point of the conversation is not to reach consensus, but to enjoy sharing opinions, potentially even learning from one another. The antidote to a big fat ego in conversation is curiosity. Forget about yourself for a while and try to enter into the world of the other person with respect and curiosity. You already know all about your perspective and opinions, so why rehash them? It's far more exciting to learn about all those opinions you don't have. Practice the art of respectful disagreement. Notice how you can completely disagree with someone without losing the connection between you. Use a little humor, ask thoughtful questions, or shift the topic to something that you do both agree on. Our ego tells us that everything like us is good and everything unlike us is bad, but is that really true? Can't we accept difference in others or even celebrate it? Take a look at the following examples and see if you can spot the difference in perspective, i.e., how the person sees the main goals of conversation. Have you watched The Queen's Gambit? You mean that thing on Netflix? Honestly, I got bored after the first episode. Really? I totally got sucked in. I'm almost considering learning chess. You can't be serious. That's not at all what playing chess is like, you know. Sure, it's just a bit of escapism, I guess, they say, thinking about their own escape from the conversation. That's the problem right there, escapism. I personally can't stand the junk they're churning out these days. I mean, read a book, right? I guess. So, who's your favorite Victorian author? Huh? Mine's George Eliot. A lot of people can't appreciate that kind of thing. Attention span's too short, but I do. I sometimes think I could have been George Eliot in a past life. People don't appreciate literature anymore. It's criminal. Too easy to sit in front of the TV and binge watch the garbage they make these days. Of course, I don't even own a TV. Do you own a TV? I read this study the other day about the effects of TV, and so on. In a way, this person has won the conversation. They are king of castle, and the other person likely feels bad, but as far as creating connection, warmth, or enjoying a lively conversation, it's a solid 1 out of 10. Consider instead, have you watched The Queen's Gambit? You mean that thing on Netflix? Honestly, I got bored after the first episode. Really? I totally got sucked in. I'm almost considering learning chess. Yeah, I bet. I have to be honest, chess bores me to tears. But the clothes in that show, I can get behind that. Exactly. They make being a chess prodigy look so elegant. And here's me, sitting in my Hello Kitty sweatpants. Oh, don't even get me started. Are you working from home then? Notice that in both conversations there is disagreement. But in the second, this disagreement is seamlessly skipped over to land on something else that can keep the conversation flowing. Whereas in the first, the conversation sputters and stalls on the person's insistence on lecturing the other and giving them a lesson about good taste, i.e., snobbery. Ego shuts conversations down, whereas curiosity, humor, and empathy keep them alive and flowing. Tell yourself that the person in front of you has something amazing to teach you or share with you. Approach the conversation as a way to find out what that is. It may seem too simple, but a good trick is to act as though you already know this person thinks you're great. This will put you at ease and curb the desire to puff up your ego. You don't have anything to prove. See conversations as a tennis match, and don't forget to volley back the ball after you have spoken for a while. Keep asking them questions rather than looking for a way to butt in with your observations. Remember the saying, people will usually forget what you say, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Thing to avoid 4, bragging. It's perfectly natural to want others to think positively about you. It's human nature to want to be liked, respected, even admired. And in dating, it's all part of the game to hope that the people you're into are also into you. However, we can end up shooting ourselves in the foot if we're too direct about promoting ourselves. In other words, if we're seen to be bragging. You might sincerely think you're awesome, or you may have a low self-esteem and are compensating with an over-the-top act of confidence. Either way, bragging has the opposite effect of what we'd really like it to. People may be unimpressed and find you arrogant, even to the extent where they think worse of you than if you'd said nothing at all. It's one of the unspoken rules of human socialization. You're not meant to blow your own trumpet. Even if you do happen to be beautiful, accomplished, intelligent, or super interesting, there's something about boldly claiming the fact that diminishes it in the other people's eyes. Far better to merely be who you are, carry yourself with quiet assurance, and let other people recognize how awesome you are. Now, before you assume that this conversational mistake doesn't apply to you, think twice and be honest about whether you may have indulged in a little humble bragging here and there. We've all seen it happen, and we all respond to it in similar ways, either finding it amusing at best or annoying at worst. The humble brag is a transparent attempt to talk about how amazing you are, while at the same time not appearing to be. It's almost worse than bragging, since the person likely realizes that bragging isn't appropriate, but wants to do it anyway, and maybe even be praised for it. Oh, I hate my hair. It's so long and thick, it takes me ages to brush. Yesterday, this complete stranger said it was beautiful. So embarrassing. I just want to say that, yes, I've donated over $100,000 to this cause, but please, I only wish I could do more. I'm just so grateful that I've had the seemingly unlimited financial success to make a difference, and no matter how small. Whew, just came back from Bali. I am exhausted. The flight was delayed by a half hour, but thank God my PA and financial advisor were there to keep me sane. So blessed. If she wasn't keeping an eye on me, who knows how big my Gucci addiction would be. These humble brags are obviously quite obvious, and that's just the problem. They're usually not subtle. After all, you don't want the other person to mistakenly think you're actually humble, and make the other person feel that you're more concerned with flattering yourself than having a genuine connection with them. It's yet another barrier to genuine, enjoyable conversation. The ironic thing about being boastful or using false modesty is that it usually comes from its opposite, from insecurity or the belief that we need to be perfectly amazing before we're worth talking to or liking. A better tactic by far is to actually embrace your imperfections. Confidently own up to all your flaws and quirks, and, counterintuitively, you immediately seem more charming and real to people. The presence of someone who is perfect, or trying to be, can put everyone else on edge. It's far more comfortable to talk to someone who is honest, normal, and genuinely humble. In fact, if impressing others is your goal, the best way to do it is to simply be an impressive person and then downplay your achievements. There's a reason self-deprecating people are so likable. They seem to communicate a quiet, easy confidence in themselves, no need for approval from others, and a good sense of humor to boot. All very attractive qualities to have. At the very least, if you really are feeling proud of yourself or want to brag a little about something, do it in a way where you have some plausible deniability. People don't like others who are trying too hard to be who they aren't or portray themselves in an overly flattering light. If you do boast and are called out on it, you can save the situation by being candid and owning up to it. After all, we've all done it. Here are some ways to be genuinely humble and unpretentious. Laugh at yourself. You'll put other people at ease and show that you're not primarily concerned with boosting your own ego. Generally, avoid talking about your accomplishments at all, since it can be a fine line between bragging and just stating. Rather, let your achievements speak for themselves if you really must. Focus on the other person and make them feel good. Play up their virtues with compliments and ask plenty of questions to show where your real interest lies in the other person. Be a little self-deprecating. It can be so refreshing when people are aware of their own flaws. This self-awareness can make you seem more human, more relatable, and even more lovable. People may feel that you're more likely to be compassionate to them if you happily accept who you are. Ask for people's opinions and be interested in what they tell you. If you disagree, treat this disagreement as just another interesting part of the conversation. Thing to avoid 5, mismatched energy. One scenario goes like this. Someone's a bit annoyed and feeling down at a party, and a person who's trying to talk to them is a little tipsy and feeling chatty and happy. No matter what the first one says, the second seems to respond with jokes and encouragement to cheer up. The conversation fizzles for understandable reasons. These two are just not in the same place emotionally. However, if the second person noticed that the first was feeling a bit annoyed and down, they might dial things back a little and have a more quiet, relaxed chat instead. If the first person also noticed the other's energy, they may meet them halfway by pepping up a little. If they can both find their way toward a shared emotional frame, then a meaningful conversation is suddenly possible. Though the previous 4 small talk mistakes may have seemed obvious, the last one is far more subtle. If good communication is about establishing that human connection with someone else, then you can think of mismatched energies as a barrier to that proper connection. You could say and do all the right things, but if your energy is weird or vastly different from the person you're talking to, it's unlikely you'll feel on the same wavelength. There's nothing woo-woo or mystical about energy. It refers only to the enthusiasm and degree of excitement you have as you talk, and it's about the kind of energy you're holding. What some call passionate and bubbly, others may perceive as pushy or even threatening. You may feel calm and content, yet it may come across as boring. So, how do you become aware of and optimize your energy when doing small talk? A simple trick is to take your lead from the other person. If they're talking quietly, being low-key about things and acting generally relaxed, follow suit and use the same tone and volume of voice, matching their gestures and posture. If they're eager and talking quickly, you can communicate that you're alongside them by doing the same. It's not rocket science. If you want to show someone that you're happy to join them in a shared conversation, you'll foster feelings of bonding and good chemistry if you're both painting from the same palette, so to speak. You may do this naturally, but the next conversation you're in, pay attention and see if you can deliberately calibrate your energy to more closely match and support the other person's. Avoid extreme low or extreme high energy states. Nobody likes an over-the-top hyper person, or else the human equivalent of Eeyore. And try to modulate and vary your emotional pitch to keep things interesting. If you notice yourself getting all serious, lighten it up again to keep your listeners' interest and ensure the conversation doesn't stall or stagnate, or vice versa. If you can mirror your conversation partner's energy levels, you communicate to them on a very primal level that you are with them, feeling similarly, inhabiting the same emotional universe, and essentially in agreement. This can feel very flattering for the other party. They may not even understand exactly why they feel so close and connected to you. Here are some ways to mirror or match your energy to the other person. Make your tone of voice, as well as the volume, the same as theirs. Mimic their posture or body language. Not too closely, though. You don't want to freak them out. Reflect back a few noteworthy phrases or words they use. If it's appropriate, slightly shift your accent to more closely resemble theirs, or emphasize the points where your manner of speech is like theirs. You're not being fake, only enhancing the ways you're literally speaking their language. Match their level of formality. For example, don't be too casual if they're being formal. Notice the tone of what they're actually saying and reflect that back. If they're sharing a personal, humorous anecdote, for example, don't respond in a detached academic way, or vice versa. Ultimately, learning to be better at small talk is learning to be a better conversationalist all around. And to do that, we need to rethink how we understand the goals of any interaction with others. When we can frame conversation as a way to encounter others, to learn, to experience them and their viewpoints, to play, explore, or simply enjoy sharing, then we're halfway to becoming masters at small talk. Takeaways. Small talk is not a mysterious inbuilt trait, but a skill anyone can learn and master. Being better at conversation is about understanding the real goal of any small talk, to foster closer and more genuine human connections with others. There are many barriers to this connection, and these are habits and mindsets to avoid. If we treat the goal of conversation as a way to play at being an ideal version of ourselves, the cool guy, we risk coming across as fake, desperate, or unlikable. If we see the goal of conversation as a chance to prove how right or how intelligent we are, we miss an opportunity to genuinely learn about the other person and enjoy one of the main perks of dialogue, delving into someone else's perspective. If we see the goal of conversation as a battle or context to win, or a way to demonstrate our superiority, we treat our conversation partners like enemies or merely an audience, and this definitely stops the natural flow of conversation and prevents bonding. If we see the goal of conversation as a way to prove our value as human beings, we may be tempted to brag and boast, but this has the opposite effect and makes us unlikable. Plus, humble bragging is nearly always very transparent. Finally, a big barrier to genuine connection and rapport is simply not being on the same wavelength or mismatched energies. We can learn to be better at this by matching our posture, what we're saying, and how we speak to the person we're talking to. This has been How to Engage, Connect, and Captivate. Become the social presence you've always wanted to be. Small talk, meaningful communication, and deep connections. Written by Patrick King, narrated by Russell Newton. Copyright 2021 by Patrick King. Production copyright by Patrick King.